The beacons lit up at 0312, all 19 of them, in the exact sequence our archivists had predicted for 11,000 years. I was at the duty station on Catherine Gate's inner platform when the first pulse came through. A narrow-band carrier wave on a frequency so old, it predated human language. The operator beside me didn't need to say a word. We both knew what it meant. I pressed the acknowledgement key and watched the board go from amber to red, not because something had gone wrong, but because this was what right had always looked like. After 40,000 years, the Keth compact had come back to collect. I keyed my headset. Command, Gate 1. Inbound contact, beacon pulse sequence confirmed. Initiating Catherine protocol. All batteries to standby. The voice that came back was calm. They were all calm. We had prepared for this. The compact's extraction fleet dropped through upper atmosphere in a formation our models had mapped almost exactly. 7 primary harvest vessels, elongated, dark-hulled, their undersides studded with the same drill array housings their ships had carried 40 millennia ago. 4 escort platforms running ahead, sensor arrays already sweeping, and 1 command tender, heavier than the rest, sitting back at altitude like a judge waiting for a verdict. They would not have noticed us yet. That was deliberate. The Keth compact had seeded this planet before my species walked upright. They had bored extraction beacons into bedrock at 19 sites across the northern continent, each one encoded with a harvest timer and a return coordinate. Then they had looked at the mammals scratching in the mud, decided we would not outlast the beacons, and left. They had not been cruel about it. They simply had not considered us a variable worth tracking. 40,000 years. Our first archivists decoded the beacon signal in the deep past, back when we still lived under open sky rather than under the shadow of the platforms. They decoded it, recorded everything, and passed the knowledge forward. Every generation of Earth's defense engineers received the same file. This is the signal. This is the formation. This is the return vector. Build accordingly. I had read that file when I was 22 years old, fresh out of planetary defense school, assigned to a listening post on the outer wall. I had read it and looked out at the unfinished scaffolding of the Catherine Gate and understood, for the first time, what the construction was actually for. 30 years later, I was watching the gate earn its purpose. Command, Gate 1. Fleet is splitting into harvest approach vectors. 7 primary vessels, 4 escorts, 1 command tender, per projection model, no deviation. I paused. They haven't looked up yet. They were flying on autopilot. 40,000 years of silence had confirmed their assumption. A dead world, a ripe harvest, nobody home. Their extraction beacons had been broadcasting on schedule, recording mineral accumulation data into deep storage, doing exactly what they were designed to do. The compact would have read that data as they entered the system. 40 millennia of undisturbed geological yield, waiting in the bedrock. To them, this descent was paperwork. The first vessel crossed into the gate's coverage zone at 0341. Every battery along the 600-kilometer perimeter came online simultaneously. Not firing, not transmitting. Just online, their targeting locks visible to any sensor array sophisticated enough to read them, which the compact's arrays certainly were. The formation held for 4 seconds. Then the lead harvest vessel broke off its descent vector. Then the others followed. I watched the command tender's altitude increase by 3 kilometers in 40 seconds. That was a ship that had just done arithmetic and had not liked the result. For 90 seconds, nothing moved. I watched the escort platforms on the display, their sensor arrays sweeping back and forth across the gate's perimeter. They were looking for the source of the targeting locks, trying to count them. I had read the briefings on compact escort doctrine. They would stop descending once they had identified what they considered a manageable threat, then assess whether to break through or negotiate. The doctrine assumed they would find a manageable threat. One of the escort platforms rotated toward Battery 7 on the southern perimeter wall, its forward array going active. It was ranging. Our fire control officer, a quiet man named Hovel who had worked the gate for 16 years, looked at me once. I shook my head. Battery 7 came online at full targeting resolution instead. Not firing, just answering the range query with the full weight of its response envelope, so that the escort platform's sensors could see exactly what a firing solution looked like from that distance. The escort platform's array went dark. It moved back toward the command tender. The hail came in on their own beacon frequency, which they would have understood was a message in itself. They had arrived on a channel they considered private. We had been listening to it for 11,000 years. The transmission was in a language our linguists had reconstructed from the beacon code itself. We had been working on it for roughly 8,000 years. The voice that came through was flat, clipped, bureaucratic. The voice of something that ran extraction operations across 100 worlds and had never once found one that talked back. This is Harvest Arbiter Kethsoon, of the Compact's Third Yield Authority. We are responding to a targeting event on our licensed extraction sites. Please identify your authority. I let the silence hold for a moment. Old habit. My predecessor at this post had told me once that the silence was not theater, that it was simply the time required to breathe and remember what the job was. She had learned that from hers. The discipline went back further than I could trace. Harvest Arbiter Kethsoon, I said. This is Planetary Surface Command, Earth, Catherine Gate Sector. You are in active defense coverage. Your extraction licenses are not recognized under current planetary authority. Please hold your position. Another silence. This one from their side. We are operating under Compact Survey Charter, issued at the time of beacon placement. The voice had not changed register. They were still in paperwork mode. This world was assessed as uninhabited at charter date. Our records indicate no subsequent claim was filed. Your records cover the last 40,000 years. A pause. Our records indicate no beacon frequency contact during the licensed harvest window. Your beacons broadcast on a closed frequency, I said. We decoded it. We chose not to answer until you arrived. Please stand by. I cut the channel and pulled up the transmission package we had prepared. It had been sitting in our archive for 600 years, updated every decade by a team of planetary archivists whose entire function was to anticipate this conversation. A thorough briefing document, formatted in the Compact's own administrative structure. We had reverse-engineered that from the beacon code as well. A complete record of Earth's inhabited history. Population figures. Megastructure specifications. Defense platform counts. The orbital ring's construction timeline. The Catherine Gates operational parameters, including the number of batteries currently tracking the Harvest Arbiter's command tender. The last page was a single line, in compact administrative notation, which our linguists had been particularly careful to get right. It translated, as near as we could tell, as, "Licensed extraction is not currently available at this location." I sent it and reopened the channel. We have transmitted a summary of Earth's current status for your records. There was a longer pause this time. I imagined the Arbiter reading through it. I imagined the moment when the number of defense platforms crossed whatever threshold their risk calculus used. I had no way to know what that threshold was, but I was confident we had exceeded it. We had spent 12,000 years making sure we had exceeded it. Your species. The Arbiter's voice had changed, marginally. Still bureaucratic, but slower. You were assessed at pre-technological. The survey record was accurate for its time, I said. 40,000 years is a long time. You decoded the beacon frequency. Yes. And you did not contact us. We had nothing to say to you until you arrived. Now you're here, and we have terms. The channel went quiet for nearly 2 minutes. I watched the command tender's position hold steady. The 4 escort platforms had moved to cluster around it, which struck me as a reasonable instinct, if ultimately decorative. When the Arbiter came back, the bureaucratic register was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Not fear, or at least not what I would call fear in a human being. More like a recalculation in progress. Like someone who had opened a ledger expecting a simple balance, and had found a figure so far outside projection that they needed to re-examine every entry that led to it. What are your terms? I read them as they had been drafted. Earth retained full sovereign authority over all surface and subsurface extraction sites. The Compact's 19 beacons would be recovered by Earth's engineering teams within the year, at no cost to the Compact. We had been planning that recovery operation for 3 centuries. The Compact would provide us, within 30 days, with the full surveyed coordinates of every other world in this region, where extraction beacons had been placed under similar assumptions about inhabitability. Our people wanted to know what else was out there with a buried timer in its bedrock, and no warning. And one member of the Arbiter's team would remain on Earth for a period of 1 standard year, as a counterpart to our own liaison assigned to their command tender to ensure terms were properly understood and documented on both sides. The last term was not punitive, it was practical. We had spent 40,000 years building toward this conversation, and we were not going to let it end with a fleet that hadn't fully absorbed what it had found here. I had written the last term myself, 3 years ago, when I had been given command of the gate, and had inherited the standard brief along with it. Every gate commander before me had reviewed the terms, annotated them, handed them on. My predecessor had added the year-length liaison requirement. Her predecessor had added the beacon recovery clause. The terms had been a living document for longer than any individual career. What I had added was small, a sentence specifying that the compact's delivered coordinates must include any worlds where Earth-origin biological material had been transplanted or observed at the time of beacon placement. We wanted to know if we were alone in what had been done to us. The Arbiter's response took 11 minutes. I spent them watching the battery readouts and thinking about the first archivist who had decoded the beacon signal back in the deep past, sitting in whatever counted as a research station then, looking at a pattern from the sky and understanding what it would eventually mean. That person had not lived to see this day. Neither had the 1,000 generations between them and me, but they had passed the file forward. They had built the habit of passing it forward. That was the work, and the work had held. Earth's terms are accepted, the Arbiter said. We request a secure docking coordinate for the liaison exchange. I'll send you one, I said. The fleet's harvest vessels were already climbing back toward a higher orbit, their drill arrays folding into transit configuration. They were not running. They were filing. That was the thing that the compact understood. Once they had read our document, this was not a defeat they were fleeing. It was a contract they were signing. The distinction mattered to them, I had been told, in ways that would take our diplomats years to fully map. I was content to let the diplomats do that work. Before I closed the channel, the Arbiter said one more thing, not in their clipped administrative register. Quieter. How long have you been watching for us? Since we decoded your signal, I said. 11,214 years, give or take. The channel closed. I pulled off my headset, set it on the console, and looked out through the gate's observation panel at the sky. The orbital ring was visible near the horizon, the way it always was on a clear morning. A fine silver arc, precise, permanent, carrying enough mass in its defensive batteries to have answered the compact's entire fleet several times over if the conversation had gone another way. It hadn't. That had also been prepared for, the possibility that they would understand the document, would read the numbers and the defense specifications and the license denial clause, and would recognize that the only available transaction was the one we were offering. Our planners had always believed that was the likely outcome. The Keth Compact ran extraction operations. They were not a military force. They had come here because the beacons told them there was unclaimed yield in the bedrock. The bedrock was claimed. The paperwork was now filed. The beacons were going to be removed. 40,000 years, and they had forgotten everything. They had forgotten that they landed on a world with mammals in it. They had forgotten that the survey said pre-technological, not impossible. They had forgotten that time moves in one direction, and that things change. Earth had not forgotten. Earth had recorded, and rebuilt, and waited. I signed off the action log, noted the Keth Compact's fleet position, and flagged the file for the diplomatic team. They would have a busy year ahead, so would the archivists, once the beacon coordinates for the other world started coming in. Outside, the morning was bright. The ring caught the sun along its upper arc. Somewhere in the northern districts, the city was waking up to a day that would look, from the street, like any other day, because we had spent 40,000 years making sure it could.